And then, we do dance with the Torah a little bit Friday night.
Friday night?
Yeah, I
Okay,
remember.
cool.
Yeah, a little bit.
I'll
And
bring it. If I come, what time could I carry?
on Friday night
Yeah, what time could I carry to?
till about 6.
Okay, 'cause I got that bottle of Gordon Liver.
And then on Saturday night you can carry after 6:30. Yeah.
Paul, have a great day.
You too. Good to see
Hate
you.
to do all my stuff and run.
Okay. Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Chapter 9. Okay. So let me do chapter 8. One second, give me a second.
Sure?
Chapter 8. Yeah, chapter 8. Okay, so now yesterday we spoke generally about the mitzvahs during the Seder. Now we're going to go more into the Haggadah. What is the order of the Seder on the 15th night? At the beginning, you bring 1 cup for each person. You make Bar Pri Gafen and you say Kiddush. Afterwards, you say Al Netilas Yadayim and you wash your hands. And you bring a Seder plate. On it, it has to have mar and another vegetable, matzah underneath, charoses, the head of a lamb, the head of a lamb, and this is all in the biblical times. And that's not the head. I'm sorry.
It says
The
body.
body of. So yeah, you need meat from the Paschal lamb, and meat from the Chagiga offering. There were 2 sacrifices that day. And nowadays, what we do is bring 2 types of meat, one for the Pesach and one for the Chagiga. So we actually bring a chicken neck or shank bone and a egg. Those are the 2 sacrifices. We say bar piadama. We take the vegetable and we dip it in charoses. That's how the Rambam does it. He dips it in charoses and then he eats olive size. Everyone does that, and they shouldn't eat less than olive size. And then afterwards, we move the Seder plate and we read the Haggadah. Then we move before we could read the Haggadah, we fill up the second cup of wine, and now here's when the son asks the Manishtana, and he says Manishtana. He goes through actually, so the only one that he has different than us, he says, why do we eat regular nights we can eat cooked meat, and today we only eat roasted, because the Paschal had to be roasted. So that's the only other question that's additional in the Mishnah that the Rambam's quoting at the times when the temple exists, as the Rambam generally goes to the halacha when the temple exists. Nowadays, we don't say halayla hazakula tzili. Now we only eat roasted meat tonight because we don't have the korban. Then we start with the story. We start with Harami Ovid Avi. We start with the bad part of the story, so to speak, when Lavan was trying to destroy us. Then we turn the table to the place. So if you can imagine, back then everyone had like private tables. So you bring the table back with the Seder plate, and we say, why do we eat this Pesach? Because the korban Pesach, because God passed over us. And we lift it up and we say, why do we eat this mar? And we say that. And then we lift the matzah and we say, why do we eat the matzah? And we say what the Haggadah says about the matzah. And now, Pesach, we don't say why are we eating Pesach, we say Pesach that we used to eat when the temple existed. And therefore we have to praise God, and we say that part. We start with some of the halal, and then we say a blessing, and we finish off, just like Hashem took us out then, take us out now, we say Bar Pri Gaven, that's the end of the second cup. Then we wash our hands a second time, and then we take 2 matzahs, split one of them, and we say Amoitzi Lechem. We take the second half and we put it elsewhere, and then we say Bar Moitzi. Why don't we do it like on 2? Because it says Lechem Aini, so you do it on 1.5. Afterwards, you take matzah and myrrh and charoses, and you dip them into charoses. So that's actually how we do it. We dip a lot of people like load up the charoses, but really in the origin, you take myrrh and you just dip it into the charoses, and you say Shekichana alachilas myrrh. And if you eat matzah by itself and myrrh by itself, you make each one a bracha by itself. That's how we do it. Afterwards, we say Shekichana mitzosav alachilas zavach, and you eat the sacrifice of the chagiga, the holiday sacrifice. The holiday sacrifice. And then you say Asher Kichana b'mitzosav etzvano al achilas haPesach, and you eat from the body of the Pesach offering. And the blessing of the Pesach does not exempt the blessing of the other sacrifice, and both one eat neither separate blessing. Nowadays that we don't have a korban, after we say hamotzi, we say alachilas matzah, we dip the matzah in charosis and eat it. And then we eat, we say alachilas mar, and then we dip it in charosis and eat it. And you don't,
should not hold it
you don't. So this is interesting. You don't take too much charosis.
Right.
All right, because if you take too much charosis, then you don't taste the mar.
Right.
So,
That's exactly what the Rambam
so you dip it in, and he says you dip it fast. And this is because this is a rabbinical mitzvah, and you don't want to take away from the biblical mitzvah. And then you say you do the matzah mar, you dip in the charosis, and you eat it without a blessing to remember the temple. Afterwards, you continue the meal, and you say anyone who wants to eat, let them eat and drink. And in the end, you you eat from the korban pesach, the paschal lamb, even an olive side, and you're not allowed to eat anything at all. And nowadays we eat matzah instead, and you can't eat anything afterwards. In order, that should be the end of the Suda, and you want the matzah or the paschal lamb to be the last taste. Afterwards, you wash your hands, and you say Birchas Hamazon on the third cup. Afterwards, you fill up the fourth cup, and then you finish the Hallel, and then you say Birchas Hashir, which is a prayer is Ishtabach. Not now. Safta's coming right now. And now you don't eat anything until after the night. After you finish, you can't eat anything. It's forbidden to eat anything except for you can drink water. The tradition in many is not even to drink water. Drinking water is if you need to drink something or eat something, so then you can drink water. But otherwise, you're not supposed to eat anything at the Seder until the morning. And then some fill up a fifth cup, and they say another Hallel on it. We do both Hallels. There's two Hallels in the Psalms, so we say both sets of Hallel, and then you finish the Hallel however you want, even though you're not eating there at this point anymore. And we eat places where they eat roasted food on Erev Pesach. They eat it. You eat it. Places where they don't eat it, we don't eat it. Maybe they'll say this is the Basar Pesach, so we don't eat roasted meat. Some Jews nowadays they'll say, oh, let's go cook lamb for Pesach, roasted lamb. Leg of lamb or something like that. So that's actually the Ashkenazi tradition is not to eat roasted lamb or roasted meat because people might confuse it with the Pesach. So in every place, so he says we don't eat roasted meat. In places where they do eat roasted meat, it's permitted, but in every place it's forbidden to eat roasted lamb that's roasted all in one shot, because it looks like you're eating a sacrifice, and it's not a sacrifice. And if it's cut up, or you're missing, or you cook part of it and it's still connected, then it's permitted in places that they allow it. In places that don't allow it, it's forbidden. It's really funny. I mean, I remember there was a guy here, and so he was a college student, and he said, oh yeah, my mom always cooks a leg of lamb on the Seder, and I pointed out that it's interesting that many Jews don't eat it. And he said, well, that's the only thing we would do for Pesach. So that is an interesting law, that not to roast meat, and not to eat roasted meat at the Seder, and also not to eat lamb. Okay, someone doesn't have wine on Pesach, he could use the bread, the matzah, just like you do on Shabbos, and you do everything at Seder. Someone who doesn't have vegetables, he only has maror, and then he makes 2 brachas on the maror, and he eats it. So he makes hadama and the blessing on the maror, and then he does that order, and then when he eats in the maror later in the Seder, he doesn't make a bracha. Someone who doesn't have shmor matzah, he only has the olive amount. So really what you're supposed to do is eat an olive amount at the matzah part and olive amount at the end. Now what we do is the olive amount we should be eating about a matzah and a half by the end of the Seder minimum, because we should be eating a third of a matzah when we eat the matzah, a third of the matzah when we have the koyrach, and a third of the matzah after the Seder. So I'll be honest, I really don't eat much of the Seders here because it's a lot of matzah to eat. By the end of the Seder, if you just eat matzah, it's a lot of matzah. Now, we do the Seder very fast. At a slower Seder, then I have more space to eat. You have some breath work. But here, we try and do it fast, so you eat matzah, and then you eat matzah, and then you eat the korech, and then you eat a little meal. I literally just eat the egg, and I understand why traditionally Jewish people just eat the egg, because it's like, okay, someone who's sleeping, falls asleep, and he wakes up, he doesn't continue eating. People who are in a group, that some are sleeping, fell asleep, you can wake them up. If they all fall asleep, they can't eat. If they just dozed off, then you can. Ask mommy to open it. Okay, that is today's Rambam. The Rambam here also goes through his Haggadah. This is the Nusach of the Haggadah of the Rambam. Very old Haggadah the Rambam has. It's basically the same as our Haggadah, except a couple nuances here and there. They still have Rambam Haggadahs that people use, Sephardi Haggadahs.
So tomorrow we'll start.
Shofar and Lula. Yeah, but in most Tanyas it has a big preface because as we were talking, we started basically the preface last week. It kind of goes back now. It kind of goes back, and it goes back to really the discussion before chapter 26. So, so
We did a lot of talking.
So what we're talking about is basically what the Alter Rebbe explains is the consciousness is the animal soul of the person, and it's difficult to be human. We're basically inborn soul that's placed into an animal. So for a big part of our life, we follow instinct, and we follow what's in our best interest as humans. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, what he's trying to do is trying to explain how you can truly come to love and be committed to God, which in the Tanya's perspective is not the real human way of, and that's why the Alter Rebbe is writing to people. The Tanya is based on letters. That it's probably people who said, I just feel like I keep circling back to my instinctful self. I'm not able to really transform myself. So the Alter Rebbe basically explains two ways of doing it in just very summary. One of them is you absorb yourself in into godly information, a lot of godly information, meditation, and that way, even though you cannot fully get rid of your animal soul, but you can take control of your thought, speech, and action. And that's very big in the beginning of the Tanya. Thought, speech, and action are in the ability of humans to control. On the other hand, emotions and desires of your animal soul, you can't really control them. So basically, your animal soul could really want something bad that might be sinful or might just not be godly. It might be, it might be self. And what you could do is you could say, I really want that thing, but I'm not going to think about it, and I'm not going to talk about it. And what is a Beinoni? A Beinoni is somebody who is in control of his thought, speech, and action. And the Tanya remarks that people should wish they could be a Beinoni, even for a little bit, because it's quite difficult to be a Beinoni. The Tanya then goes and says, it's really hard. Not everyone has the mind capacity to really enter a alternative reality of God, where they're able to learn how to control their impulses. So the Tanya basically goes in a second idea, which is, the Alter Rebbe says this is much closer to humans. And what does it say? It says really inside everything, the motor that powers everything. Ask mommy. The motor, ask mommy. The motor that powers everything is your godly soul. And your godly soul actually only wants God. It doesn't want anything for its own self. It is created in a way that it is totally God-centric. And that is truthfully the engine of a human, of a Jewish person. Now, the Alter Rebbe says, when does that come out? Very rarely. But he says that it basically, I'm just summing up, it's actually very extremely powerful chapters. In chapter 17, 18, 19, he says it comes out usually when Jewish people are forced to make a decision have to sacrifice their life. When Jewish people are in a situation that have to sacrifice for Judaism, and they do it, and every Jew, the Tanya says, has a situation like that, has a situation where they will give their life because they will feel their disconnect of their godly soul. And that's when their godly soul comes out. So there's certain mitzvahs which we do or we're not conscious of, and we don't really care about them. And when we do that sin or we break that sin, we're like, oh, what's the big deal? But then there's certain times that every Jew, and so the Alter Rebbe says it's quite common that Jewish people, when they're told that they have to convert to another religion, or they're told that they need to serve idolatry, their stubborn godly soul comes out, and it's even shocking. Sometimes there are people who didn't even consider themselves Jewish, or maybe even consider them that religion, but when they have to make a statement, what? So then no. So then they have to. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says. Now, so basically, the Alter Rebbe says if you can access that godly part of yourself on a daily basis, then you will not want to sin. You only want to do mitzvahs, and you'll always be conscious of God. So how do you access it? Well, so the Alter Rebbe gives advice. a certain idea where the Alter Rebbe basically says that there's 2 commandments in the 10 commandments that are the most important commandments. One of them is to know that there's God, and one of them is to not serve idols. And he says if you realize it, whenever you do a mitzvah, you are realizing that there's God. And whenever you do a sin, or something selfish, and again, what we mean selfish doesn't mean like in a derogatory sense. Selfish means self-interest. When you do something with self-interest, then you're serving another God, essentially. Essentially, you're serving something besides God. So the Alter Rebbe says when you think about that a lot, then anytime you want to do something with self-interest, you'll say, I don't want to serve idolatry, and then you'll awaken the godly soul. And whenever you do a mitzvah, you'll say, oh, I only want to serve God. I only want to do what God wants. And then you awaken your godly soul as well. So that's what the advice the Alter Rebbe gives. And the Alter Rebbe goes in great length, actually, to give that and explain it in detail. So now, in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe talks about failure. That's really what the Alter Rebbe is talking about here. Previously, he said you have to be joyous, because if you're not joyous, and you let yourself follow the bitter feelings, then that's also the evil inclination. You'll lose. You'll automatically lose. Because in Judaism, if you want to announce God's existence in the world and denounce idolatry, you have to be excited about it. If you're not excited, then you're not able to act in the army. Now here, the Alter Rebbe is talking about a different discussion here. He says, so let's start. V'hine l'tesevas bir teves la'asaysay. So the verse in the Torah that Tanya is based on, it says, Ki karev elecha hadavar miyad. God is very close to you. Beficha, in your mouth, ubelvavcha, in your heart, la'asaysay, to your action, that you may do. So the verse says that, and the Alter Rebbe is trying to explain, how is in fact God close to your heart? If your heart is animalistic. As we said, again, the consciousness of a person is animalistic. So how is God close to your heart? So that's what the whole Tanya is trying to explain, that verse. And we'll go back to the beginning of Tanya and we'll see that's the verse in the Torah that Tanya is trying to explain. Now the verse says, in your heart, in your mouth, in your heart, that you may do. So the climax of everything in the Torah, that God being close to your heart, is that there's an emphasis on action. So now we're going to understand why is there an emphasis on action. In other words, God is in my mouth, God is in my heart, which represents thought. The Alter Rebbe says, how is it that God is in my action? And also, we're going to have to understand what is the purpose of Beinanim. Now again, a Beinani, so in the beginning of the Tanya, a Beinani is somebody who mastered his thought, speech, and action. And the Tanya says that's very rare, but every human being potentially is capable of that. So that is what we're supposed to strive for. We're supposed to strive to be a Beinani. We may never reach it, but we can't strive to be a tzaddik, we strive to be a Beinani. So in this chapter we're going to explain why is there an emphasis on action, and we're going to understand in a very small measure the purpose of God creating Beinanim.
You can't strive to be a Beinani?
You can. You can strive to be a Beinani, and the Tanya says you can't really truly strive to be a tzaddik. Because okay, so what is the difference between a Beinani and a tzaddik? A Beinani, a tzaddik, his heart is in his control. So this is actually really great. In the Kabbalah class, there's this amazing map, and it actually goes through. It starts at the bottom of human, and it goes and compares it to God. So a difference between a tzaddik and a Beinani is before we a lot of times think we are consciousness. But before our body gets to conscious state, there's subconscious state. And there's all sorts of elements and perception of our subconscious state. We have emotions. Now the way that Tanya looks at it, emotions isn't what I feel right now. Emotions are something that's almost like computer programming inside of us. And when we feel something, we are experiencing an emotion that we have. Right? So, if we love, before we love, there's the ability to love. And that exists in us. And there's already attraction in our heart, ingrained, programmed in our heart. And it's the same with every emotion. Every emotion exists before we experience it. So now, Tanya says, the experience we're in control of. But the actual attraction or the emotion, that we're not in control of. Only a tzaddik is in control of. That's what the Tanya says.
So we're talking about the effect of the emotion on your behavior.
Correct. So like
Yeah,
basically, what could we do? We might have attraction to something which is not kosher. So a Beinoni knows this that I have attraction in me, I don't really necessarily have a choice because I'm an animal. But this that I A, act on it, B, speak about it, C, think about it, that's in my control. So a Beinoni, what he'll be really doing, he'll just say, oh my gosh, that's beautiful or tasty or whatever it is. He'll say, oh, I'm going to change the subject now and think about Torah, or think about something holy, or think about even something mundane, but something which is not as bad. So that's in a great length in the beginning of the Tanya. Let me just show you the map, actually. You know, so this is the map. So actually, these are the 41 terms, key terms, and this is the map. So you have the worlds, how the worlds are created, and then you have the human consciousness. So here you have thought, speech, and action down here. Those are in our consciousness. Then you have emotions. So the emotions are in our subconsciousness. So it's like, this is something that a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people think that humans are rational creatures. What they don't realize is a lot of times what they're doing is they're just implementing their rational analysis of their thought in order to get what they want, what they have attraction to.
Right.
So in other words, and it's really deep. It's like, let's say even science. Science is basically following what you see. That's basically following what you see. So if you don't accept that your vision is real, then there goes the whole science, right? So a lot of people are stuck to science because if you don't follow what you see, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, right? It's like if you don't there's a certain satisfaction we have of understanding what we see and building on that. So that's how. So here, basically, the Beinoni is in control here. So actually, it's really interesting. The way it works is it starts off soul garments. The first class is about here. The second lesson is about here. The third lesson is about here. Fourth, fifth, sixth, and divine image is over here. That's the godly soul. So all this stuff in between isn't necessarily godly. So it's a map. You can look at it, but I only have one. So be very careful. Make sure you bring it back. Okay. So here the Tanya says. So understand, what is the purpose of a Beinoni? Ask mommy. V'yiridas nishmasein le'el mahazal islabas v'nafsh v'hamas. So no. V'yiridas nishmasein le'el mahazal islabas v'nafsh v'hamas shana klivas etracha. Also, what is the purpose of the soul's descent into this world, going into an animal soul, deriving from klippa and sitra achra? So what is the purpose of God taking divine souls and putting them into mundane souls, mundane bodies and souls, animal souls? Okay, since the Beinoni will not be able to banish the animal soul throughout their lives. Again, we're talking about a Beinoni who we would call a Beinoni human perfection. But a Beinoni understands that he will not be able to banish his animal soul. He will not be able to he will be able to do impulse control, but he won't be able to change his impulse during his lifetime. He won't even dislodge it from its place in the left part of the heart. So early in the Tanya, it describes in the body, so to speak, where the animal soul resides. What would it mean to dislodge your animal soul? It would mean that evil imaginings, ungodly, unholy imaginings would not rise into the brain. In other words, the Beinoni the whole time, he's fighting his fighting the impulses coming into his brain. That's what he's stopping them. His brain's saying, do this, stops it quickly. So he's not going to be able to stop that connection, which is really from over, this package over here is coming to his thought, right? So this package here of the animal soul is coming into stop. So he's not going to be able to stop that movement from here to here. He's only able to stop it once it comes into here. I'm not explaining now. Okay, we're not learning that now.
But there are desirable impulses, right? I mean,
Well, I mean, in the Tanya's perspective, there are godly impulses and ungodly impulses.
oh,
So the impulse to survive, right, can be used like the impulse to survive. Even a Beinoni would be hesitant to let that reside in his head because he would say, "Well, why do I want to survive?" The animal soul wants to survive because it wants to survive. So ultimately, there's many levels. There's sin impulses, right? And then there's selfish impulses. Then there's self-interest impulses. And then there's godly impulses. So we try and start on the bottom. We don't want to think about sinning, and then we don't want to think about, but that is, the Beinoni is looking at it and he's saying, hey, what's the point? All my life, I'm always going to have ungodly impulses coming into me.
it seems to me there are a lot.
Well, let's read a little bit more.
Okay.
What does he say? The essence of the animal soul remains in full strength and potency as birth. The garments, the forms of expression, evil thoughts, speech, and actions do not clothe themselves in the body, as mentioned in chapter 12, where the author explains by means of constant battle that Beinoni prevents the budding of evil of his soul from expressing itself through the speech and action. However, since the Beinoni succeeds in only suppressing the garments of the animal soul, but can never affect the change in the essential, even nature of the animal soul, the question arises. Why is he born in order to battle his whole life, and he will never be able to conquer it? So that is the question here, and we will, let's go a little bit more. So to explain the previous chapters, the ongoing battle wages Beinoni. Okay, how then can we complain the battles of vain? Yet were this divine pleasure the sole object of battle, there would be no reason for having divine soul enclosed within the animal soul. On the contrary, the two souls ought to be separate, and then they can struggle. Okay, so let this be his solis to comfort the Beinoni in a double measure of aid and gladden their hearts, who dwells among them in their Torah. The explanation will show you how to find comfort and joy in the godly light that abides within them when they study the Torah and when they engage in the service of God. Okay, so we're going to stop here, but now we're going to answer this question. So that is the today's Tanya. So to truly understand this chapter, we have to go back.